Blood was soaking through the sleeve of Elias Ferrante's white dress shirt, and the man didn't so much as glance down at it. At 38, he ran the Ferrante family and every shipping berth from Newark to Bayonne, and he'd built all of it the way he did everything else, quietly, patiently, without ever once raising his voice. Men twice his age lowered their eyes when he walked into a room. 10 minutes earlier, he'd stepped in front of a bullet meant for his 27-year-old secretary, Adeline Marsh. Now the ballroom was full of federal agents and the heads of 5 families, and every one of them was saying the same 3 words about her. She's a spy. His own people were asking permission to take her outside, and that's when Elias Ferrante crossed the floor, took her face in his hands, and kissed her in front of the FBI, in front of the families, in front of the man who just tried to have her killed. Then he said 12 words nobody in that family had heard him say in 6 years. She's going to be my wife, and the mother of my children. Not a single person moved. They weren't stunned because he'd said it. They were stunned because of what those words meant in that family, and because once they'd been said out loud, they couldn't be taken back. But what Elias did in the 90 seconds after that is what nobody in that room ever saw coming. If this is the kind of story you love, go ahead and hit that like button for us. Share it with someone who appreciates a good twist, and subscribe so you never miss what we post next. Now let's get back to the story. No one in the grand hall dared draw a deep breath. 100 people stood there, glasses still in their hands, their feet not yet having moved back from the broken glass. And every one of them was staring at the man who had just spoken those words. Elias Ferrante said nothing more. He took his hand away from Adeline's face, stepped back exactly 1 pace, then reached his right hand toward his left. The movement was so slight that those seated in the distant rows couldn't see it clearly, but the people standing nearby understood at once, and someone let out a sharp gasp. He was removing his signet ring. That ring wasn't jewelry. It bore the seal of the Ferrante family, an anchor and 3 initials engraved into its face, worn smooth from 70 years of passing from one hand to another, and it left the finger of the family's head in only 2 circumstances: when that person died, or when that person gave it to someone else and declared before the council that, from that moment forward, the other person's blood was also the blood of the family. In 70 years, the second had happened exactly 3 times. Elias held the ring between 2 fingers. Blood was still seeping slowly through his left sleeve, running down to his wrist, and he still didn't look at it. He took Adeline's hand. It was so cold and trembling so badly that he had to hold her wrist firmly before he could slip the ring onto her finger. It was far too large for her. It slid down and caught at the knuckle, and he closed her fingers around it, holding them that way for 2 more seconds before finally letting go. Adeline didn't understand what had just happened. She knew only that the entire room had changed. She felt it before she could think of the reason, the way a person senses that a storm is about to change direction. 3 minutes earlier, every eye in that room had looked at her as if she were something that needed to be cleared away. Now no one would look directly at her. At the far end of the grand hall, a very old man slowly placed both hands on the arms of his chair. Salvatore Grasso was 74 years old. He wasn't at that gathering for charity, and in 40 years, no one had ever seen him rise for anything. People stood when he entered a room, never the other way around. He rose very slowly, 1 joint at a time, and a younger man hurried to offer him a hand, but he brushed it aside. Once he was standing straight, Salvatore Grasso looked at Elias, then at the tightly closed hand of the 27-year-old woman clutching a ring far too large for her finger, and he bowed his head, not deeply, just a slight inclination, enough to lower his chin by perhaps 2 finger joints. But the 4 other men representing the other 4 families sprang to their feet almost at the same moment, and all 4 followed his example. That was when everything became irreversible, because in the world of those men, spoken promises carried no force of law, documents carried no force of law, and only one thing could bind them all, something declared before the council and then acknowledged by that council. From the moment Salvatore Grasso bowed his head, Adeline Marsh was no longer anyone's secretary. She was family. To touch her was to touch the Ferrante family. And to touch the Ferrante family after all 5 families had bowed their heads as witnesses meant declaring war on all 5. Against the wall on the right, Vincent Aldridge remained exactly where he had been standing. 62 years old, counselor to the family, the man who had stood beside Elias's father for 20 years, and then beside Elias for another 15. The man who, only 10 minutes earlier, had calmly declared that the young woman was a spy and needed to be taken outside and dealt with. He didn't move, but something had vanished from his face. The server standing nearby later said that the old counselor had suddenly turned deathly pale, so pale that he looked like a man who had just learned that someone in his own home had died. He had calculated every possibility. He had considered the possibility that the police would take the young woman away. He had considered the possibility that men from the family itself would escort her out through the back door and that she would never return. He had even considered the possibility that Elias would lose his temper, because an angry man could always be controlled. The only thing he hadn't considered was this, because this couldn't be undone. There was no way to reopen the matter for discussion, no way to persuade the council to reconsider, no loophole in their unwritten laws that would allow anyone to touch the person who carried the signet ring. In 90 seconds, Elias Ferrante didn't kill anyone, didn't raise his voice, and didn't draw a weapon. He merely removed a ring, and with that alone, he had stripped Vincent Aldridge of the most important power the man possessed that night. Adeline stood in the middle of the grand hall, her fingers clenched around the band of metal still warm from another person's skin, her head reeling as noise surged back from every side. She lifted her eyes to Elias. He wasn't looking at her. He was staring directly at Vincent, and there was nothing on his face. No anger, no triumph, only the composure of a man who had just placed the final piece on the board, the one move his opponent had never expected. Then he turned away, and only then did Adeline see that the blood had soaked through nearly the entire left sleeve of his shirt. The woman who parted the crowd and walked toward them looked unlike anyone else in the room. She wore work clothes and flat shoes, and she walked straight between the two families without lowering her eyes even once. Catherine Doyle, 43 years old, a federal agent, stopped exactly 2 steps from Elias, and she didn't look at him first. She looked at Adeline. "Are you hurt?" she asked. Adeline shook her head. "Can you speak?" She shook her head again, then realized that was the wrong answer, and tried to open her mouth, but no sound came out. Doyle nodded as though that, too, was an answer. "I need to take Miss Marsh back to the office," she said in a calm voice. 2 people opened fire at an event, with 40 witnesses present, and she was the only person standing at the center of it. "I need her statement tonight." Elias didn't answer at once. He looked at her longer than courtesy allowed, then spoke in the same low, even voice he had used for every sentence in his life. "Do you have a warrant?" Doyle didn't blink. "I have a crime scene and an active investigation. I asked whether you have a warrant," Elias repeated, without raising his voice in the slightest. "Do you have an arrest warrant, a subpoena, or anything in your pocket bearing a judge's signature?" Silence followed. Doyle had been doing this long enough to know exactly what was happening, and long enough not to pretend otherwise. "Not yet," she said. "Then Miss Marsh will meet with you tomorrow, with her attorney present, wherever you choose," Elias said. "Not tonight. Tonight she can't even stand on her own, and you know that, or you wouldn't have asked whether she could speak before asking me anything." Doyle was silent for several seconds. There were agents in her position who would have chosen another course, who would have threatened him, called for more people, and made a scene they could later include in their reports. She didn't. She knew where the law stood, and she knew that if she forced an uncharged witness to leave the scene without anything in hand, every statement she obtained that night would be thrown out at a later trial, and the only person who would benefit was whoever had hired those 2 gunmen. 9 tomorrow morning, she said. "Not 10. 9 tomorrow morning," Elias replied. Doyle turned to Adeline again, and this time she stepped closer, near enough to speak so that only Adeline could hear. "Miss Marsh, I don't know which side you're standing on tonight, and to be honest, I'm not sure you know either. But there is one thing I know for certain. Someone in this room wants you dead, and that person isn't either of the 2 men who ran away." She took Adeline's hand, the one clutching the ring that was far too large, and pressed a business card into her palm. "The number at the bottom is my private line. It doesn't go through the switchboard. You can call at any hour, even at 3 o'clock in the morning. I won't ask you any questions tonight, and I won't ask any when you call unless you want to talk." Adeline looked at the card in her hand. She tried to say thank you, but the words caught somewhere in her throat and couldn't make the rest of the journey. Doyle didn't wait. She straightened, gave Elias a single nod, then turned her back and walked toward her team, who were setting up a perimeter around the area scattered with broken glass. As she went, not one man from any of the 5 families moved, and no one said a word. Then a hand settled lightly on Adeline's elbow, gentle but leaving her no choice to remain where she was. Teddy Ricci, 45 years old, Elias's chief bodyguard, was a large man who never used 5 words when 3 would do. "This way," he said. Adeline turned to look for Elias. He was already standing in the middle of a circle of 4 men who were all speaking to him at once, and he didn't turn around. Teddy tightened his grip slightly on her elbow. "You shouldn't be standing in the middle of the room right now," he said. He led her through the service door, down a narrow corridor, and through the kitchen, where everyone stood pressed against the walls, staring at her with a look she would remember for a long time. No one stopped them. No one asked a single question. At the end of the corridor, Teddy pushed open the emergency exit, and the cold night air struck her face like a slap, bringing her halfway back to her senses. A car was already waiting. Adeline stopped on the threshold. "Is he all right?" she asked, and those were the first words she had spoken since the gunshots. Teddy looked at her for a long time, and she could read nothing on his face except one thing, so clear that there was no need to hide it. He didn't trust her. He opened the car door. "Get in, Miss Marsh," he said. Adeline had been sitting in the car for nearly 10 minutes when the door on the other side opened, and Elias slid into the seat beside her. He had changed his shirt. His left arm was bandaged beneath the fabric, and he rested it on his lap as though it didn't belong to him. The family's private physician had just extracted the bullet and stitched the wound in the back room, but Elias acted as if he felt no pain at all. Teddy closed the door, climbed into the front seat, and the car began to move. No one spoke for a long while. Adeline could hear her heart pounding in her ears, and along with it, something else was rising inside her. No longer fear, but anger that had come too late, the kind of anger that appears only when a person has run out of room to be afraid. "You have to tell me what just happened," she said. Elias didn't answer. "You just told an entire room that I was going to be your wife. You put something on my hand that I don't understand, and all 5 of those men stood up and bowed their heads, and I don't even know what I've just become. You didn't ask me a single question." She heard her voice break at the end of the sentence, and she hated it. "I have a right to know." Elias kept looking straight ahead. He didn't turn toward her once throughout everything that followed, and later, when she looked back on that night, she understood that he had done it deliberately, because if he had looked at her, she wouldn't have been able to speak. "The hard drive on the 3rd floor," he said. Adeline stopped breathing. "You copied it 11 times in 3 months. 3 times during the first week, then less often, and then more frequently again over the past 2 weeks. The last time was tonight, at 12 minutes past 9. A silence stretched so long that she could clearly hear the tires against the road. "I knew from the first time," he said. Her entire world collapsed in 2 seconds. She had imagined dozens of versions of the night she was discovered, and every one of them included shouting, humiliation, someone grabbing her by the collar. None of them looked like this. A man sitting 1.5 feet away from her, his arm still bandaged because of the bullet meant for her, reciting the exact time of every betrayal in the voice of someone reading from a schedule. 3 months, she said. "You knew for 3 months. Elias didn't answer. "Then why? Why didn't you fire me? Why didn't you hand me over to them? Why did you stand in front of me?" He continued looking ahead. "Why won't you say anything?" She nearly shouted, and immediately felt ashamed for raising her voice, because in the 3 months she had worked as this man's secretary, she had never once heard him raise his voice at anyone, not even people who deserved it far more than she did. Then he spoke. He asked a single question, and it had nothing to do with the hard drive, nothing to do with the council, nothing to do with anything she had expected to hear. "Who is holding your mother?" Adeline whipped around to stare at him. She felt all the blood drain from her face. "What?" she said. "Your mother started dialysis at the center on 47th Street in the spring of last year, 3 sessions a week. She's waiting for a transplant. Her file there shows an outstanding balance of $340,000, including anti-rejection medication and the portion of her treatment that insurance doesn't cover. You earn $78,000 a year." He still didn't turn toward her. He kept his eyes fixed on the windshield. "No one earning $78,000 a year simply decides one day to start copying my hard drive," he said. "So I'll ask you again. Who is holding your mother?" Adeline opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Inside her mind, everything she had told herself over the past 14 months began to crack from within, one piece at a time, in an order she wasn't yet willing to face. She thought of the first phone call. Of how that man had known the exact amount of the debt before she had even told him. Of how he had called on the very afternoon she received the letter from the hospital. Of how everything had always aligned so perfectly that she had taken it for good fortune at the time. It hadn't been good fortune. It had been a schedule. Someone had been holding that schedule in his hands, knowing every day before it arrived. "I can't tell you," she whispered. "Can't? Or aren't you allowed to?" Elias asked. She looked down at her hand, where the ring, far too large for her, had slipped until it caught again at her knuckle. "If I tell you, she'll lose her place at the treatment center within 48 hours, she said. "They made that very clear to me." The car turned. For the first time during the entire ride, Elias Ferrante turned his head and looked directly at her. "Then tell me his name," he said. "And tomorrow your mother will still have her place at that treatment center. That is the only thing I'm promising you tonight. Everything else we'll discuss when you're able to sit down." They entered through the side door. Teddy went first, unlocked it, then stopped at the head of the hallway and went no farther. Elias led her into a room with a table and 2 chairs, pulled one out, and waited until she sat down. He poured a glass of water, placed it in front of her, then took the seat opposite her. "Drink," he said. Adeline held the glass with both hands because one alone couldn't keep it steady. Only after she set it down did he continue. "There is something you need to know before you say anything else," he said. "Everything you took from that hard drive was false." She looked up. The shipping manifests, the expense ledgers, the 3 overseas accounts, the names of the 4 intermediaries. "I created all of it in November of last year. Nothing in there was real. Each version was placed in a different location, and each one contained a discrepancy unique to it. A figure off by a few $100s, a name misspelled by 1 letter. If someone took that information outside, I would know where it had come from." Adeline listened to every word and felt the ground beneath her feet begin to tilt. "So you set a trap," she said. "I set a trap for someone inside my own house," he replied. "Not for you. I have known for more than a year that someone in my organization has been selling me out. I didn't know who. I needed a line I could follow to see where it led. You were that line." She laughed, a short, twisted sound that wasn't laughter at all. "You knew I was taking the files. You knew I was carrying them outside. And you still let me sit outside your office every day, still gave me your schedule, still trusted me to hold your phone." He didn't deny it. He said nothing, and that silence was the clearest answer she had received since the beginning of the night. Then he spoke, more slowly this time. "Now I need the name." Adeline stared down at the tabletop for a long while. She thought of her mother, of the chair beside the window at the treatment center, of the words someone had spoken to her over the phone 14 months earlier, in a voice so gentle that she had cried with gratitude. "Gregory Whitfield," she said. Elias didn't move. "He first contacted me in June of last year," she said. "He called on the afternoon I received the letter from the hospital. He told me he was a federal agent. He showed me his badge, showed me a photograph taken in the hallway of a federal office at Federal Plaza, knew the name of my former manager, even knew the name of the school I attended. He said your organization was under investigation, said that if I cooperated, I wouldn't be prosecuted when everything came apart, and said there was a witness assistance program that covered medical expenses for family members." She stopped. "The following month, my mother's dialysis bills stopped coming to the house. I believed him." She raised her eyes to Elias. "I believed I was working for the United States government. I believed that for 14 months. Elias sat perfectly still. Then he spoke a single sentence, without raising his voice, without mockery, merely setting a fact down on the table between them. "The FBI can't afford to pay your mother's bills." Adeline opened her mouth to argue and realized she had nothing with which to argue. "The Witness Protection Program doesn't pay $340,000 for anti-rejection medication for the mother of someone who has never given a formal statement," he said. "No program does that. No budget approves something like that in 4 weeks without a single signature from a court. You have never appeared in court. You have never signed a document. You have never met anyone other than him." She sat there and listened as every piece of the past 14 months fell away. "Then who is he?" she asked, her voice very small. "That is the question I will answer," Elias said. "But not tonight." He stood up. He walked around the table, and Adeline straightened instinctively, her entire body going rigid as she waited for something to happen. He didn't touch her. He placed a key on the table in front of her. "The second room on the left, at the end of the hallway," he said. "The door locks from the inside. This is the only key, and there isn't another copy anywhere in this house." Adeline stared at the key, not understanding. "Why are you giving me this?" she asked. "So you can lock the door," he replied. Then he added, still in that same voice, "You just told me that you have been selling me out for 3 months. In your position, you wouldn't be able to sleep with the door unlocked either." He walked out and closed the door behind him. Adeline sat motionless for a long time before finally picking up the key. She went to the room, locked the door, checked it twice, then sat on the edge of the bed, in the darkness. It was nearly 2 o'clock in the morning when she finally stood, and for a reason she couldn't explain, she opened the door a crack and looked outside. There was a chair in the hallway. Elias Ferrante was sitting there, his left arm still bandaged, reading nothing, not looking at his phone, simply sitting with his face turned toward the staircase. He didn't turn his head when he heard the door. "Go ahead and lock it again," he said. "I'll sit here until morning." At 9 o'clock in the morning, Adeline sat for 2 hours in a room at the federal offices with Catherine Doyle and a lawyer she had never met. She told them about the gala, told them where she had been standing and what she had heard. She didn't say a word about the hard drive, and no one asked her about it. When she left the building, she didn't call for a car to take her back to the mansion. She went straight to the treatment center on 47th Street. At the reception desk, she asked for a copy of the complete billing records for a patient named Nora Marsh, covering the period from June of the previous year to the present. The woman behind the glass asked who she was. "Her daughter," Adeline replied, and handed over her identification. She waited 15 minutes. Then a stack of papers was pushed through the slot. Adeline carried it to the row of chairs in the hallway, sat down, and turned to the first page. She had prepared herself to see a name. She had thought she would find Whitfield written somewhere, or the name of some federal agency, or the very program she had been told about. There was nothing of the kind. In the column on the right, repeated steadily on every line, for every month and every treatment session, there was only one entry: paying party, Harrogate Trust. She turned the page. July, Harrogate Trust. August, Harrogate Trust. She began turning the pages faster, one finger running down the column of figures, and for 14 consecutive months, not a single line changed. There was no federal program code, no court case number, no official signature. There was only a private trust, paying on time, never a penny short, month after month, for a 58-year-old woman who didn't know a single wealthy person in the world. Adeline had never heard that name before. It wasn't that she had heard it and forgotten. She had never heard it at all. She sat for a long time with the papers resting on her lap, and inside her mind, a question began forming on its own. One she didn't want to ask. If the money hadn't come from the government, and if Whitfield wasn't the one paying, then who had spent the past 14 months paying to keep her mother alive? She stood, folded the papers together, and walked into the treatment room. Nora Marsh was sitting in her usual chair beside the window, her eyes closed, her face more hollow than it had been when Adeline visited the week before. Adeline pulled up a chair, sat beside her, and took her mother's hand. "I'm here," she said. Nora opened her eyes. It took her a moment to recognize her daughter, and then she smiled. She always smiled that way, the way people smile when they're afraid of being a burden to someone else. "You came early today," she said. "Have you eaten anything, Mom?" "A little porridge. Don't worry about me." Adeline was silent for a moment, then asked in the most ordinary voice she could manage, "Have you ever heard the name Harrogate?" Nora slowly turned her head. "What?" "Harrogate. Harrogate Trust. It's a private trust." She looked out the window. Her eyes weren't focused on anything in particular, and Adeline realized that her mother was far more exhausted than she allowed anyone to see. For a long while she said nothing. Then she murmured, her voice faint and drifting, like someone speaking while half asleep. "Your father once mentioned a name that sounded like that." Adeline sat up straighter. "What did you say, Mom?" "It sounded like that," Nora said, "back then. He kept repeating it for days. I told him to stop bringing trouble from the docks home with him." Adeline felt a chill run the length of her spine. "When did Dad mention it, Mom?" Nora frowned as though she were trying to pull something up from a place buried very deep inside her. "Just before he died," she said. "That final week. He didn't sleep. He just sat at the kitchen table. Whenever I asked, he said it was paperwork, that it was nothing." She closed her eyes. He lied to me, you know. In his entire life, that was the only time he ever lied to me. Adeline tightened her hold on her mother's hand. Mom, do you remember the exact name he said? Nora didn't answer. Her breathing had already become steady again. She had fallen asleep, the sudden sleep of a sick person, in the middle of a conversation, her hand still resting in her daughter's. Adeline sat perfectly still, afraid to move. Her father had died in 2011. They had called it an accident at the docks, a fall during the night shift, with no witnesses. He had been the accountant for the dock workers' union, a man who wrote everything down, a man who had never dropped anything in his life. In 15 years, she had never questioned what happened, because she had been only 12 at the time, and no one explained things like that to a 12-year-old child. Now, sitting in that room with the billing records on her lap, she heard herself thinking something she had never allowed herself to think before. She looked down at the column on the page, at the name repeated over and over for 14 straight months, the name that was keeping her mother alive, and she wondered why a name that no one had ever spoken in her life had now been spoken for the second time by a man who had been dead for 15 years. She texted him from the old phone, the one he had given her at the beginning and ordered her to use only when contacting him. I need to meet with you. Today, he replied 4 minutes later, the same way he always did, without a single unnecessary word. 4 o'clock. The usual place. The usual place was the third level of a parking garage in Jersey City, an isolated area with no camera covering the eastern corner. Adeline arrived 20 minutes early. She sat in her car, opened the recording app on her real phone, pressed the button, then slipped it into the left pocket of her coat, with the screen facing inward. She rehearsed her opening sentence 3 times in her mind. He arrived at exactly 4 o'clock. He was always on time. Adeline stepped out of the car and leaned against the door. He came no closer than 2 steps. And he never came closer than 2 steps. You look terrible, he said. Get some sleep. I need to know what is happening, she said. Someone shot at me yesterday. He was silent for a moment. I read about it. You read about it, she said. You read about it? I was standing less than 20 feet from those 2 men. You have been telling me for 14 months that I work for the government, and not one person came to ask whether I was still alive. Someone has already contacted you, he said. That female agent, Doyle. Adeline kept her face perfectly still. She had never told him Doyle's name. She had never sent him a message about the interview that morning. How do you know her? She asked. We work in the same field, he replied, his voice still casual. Go on. Adeline changed direction. Have you ever heard of a trust called Harrogate? There was a pause, brief but unmistakable. She heard it. No, he said. Then who is paying for my mother's dialysis? The assistance program. I already told you. There is no assistance program, she said. I requested the billing records. 14 months, 1 paying party, a private trust, no federal program code, no court case number. If you work for the government, then explain that name to me. He didn't answer immediately. Then he spoke, and his voice remained as gentle as it had always been, even slightly weary, like someone forced to explain something obvious to a child. You are under a great deal of stress. Anyone would be after what happened last night. Listen to me. Your assignment hasn't changed. Get the rest of it, and then this will all be over. The rest of what? She asked. The 4th folder, he said. The drive on the 3rd floor has 4 folders. You have only given me 3. Adeline stood motionless. Her heart struck once so hard that she was afraid he had heard it. Because there weren't 4 folders. There were the 3 folders she had copied, and then there was a 4th folder she had never touched. A folder she had seen only once, and had never mentioned to anyone, including him. It was stored inside Elias Ferrante's private hard drive, behind 2 layers of passwords, in a room only 4 people were permitted to enter. No federal agency anywhere in the United States could have known it existed. Only someone inside the house could have known. Adeline heard her own voice, perfectly calm, calmer than she had imagined it could be. How do you know there is a 4th folder? He didn't answer. I never told you about it, she said. I never mentioned it, not once. So I am asking you again. Who told you there were 4 folders? This silence lasted longer, and when Gregory Whitfield finally spoke, everything in his voice had changed. The patient gentleness was gone, along with the soothing manner of an adult offering reassurance. His voice became flat and quiet. cold enough to make the skin at the back of Adeline's neck tighten. "You are asking questions that aren't good for you," he said. "Who are you?" she asked. "A dialysis machine is very easy to disconnect, Adeline." She said nothing. 3 sessions a week. He continued in that same voice. "Miss 1, and she gets sick. Miss 2, and she ends up in the emergency room. Miss 3, and they call her family. You are the only family she has left, aren't you?" Adeline clenched her hand inside her coat pocket. She felt the corner of the phone pressing into her palm, and she clung to that sensation as though it were the edge of a cliff. "The 4th folder," he said. "Within 7 days. Then I disappear from your life, and your mother continues receiving treatment until the day she gets a kidney. But if you tell anyone about this, I will still disappear from your life, only in a different way." He turned away. "Mr. Whitfield," she called. He stopped. "Did you know my father?" she asked. He stood there with his back to her for exactly 3 seconds. Then he kept walking without answering. Adeline waited until the sound of his engine had vanished completely down the ramp before collapsing beside the wheel of her own car. She pulled the phone from her pocket. Her hand was shaking so badly that she dropped it onto the concrete. She picked it up. The screen was still glowing. The recording was still running. It had captured 31 minutes. Adeline called at 11 o'clock that night. Doyle answered on the second ring and didn't ask why she was calling so late. "Tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock, she said, then gave her the address of a diner in Hoboken, not the office. Adeline arrived first. Doyle came in afterward, sat across from her, ordered black coffee, and nothing else. "What do you want to tell me?" she asked. "I want to ask you about a name first," Adeline said. "Gregory Whitfield." Doyle showed no reaction for 2 seconds. Then she set down her cup, reached into her bag, took out a thin file, and pushed it across the table. "I looked up that name last night," she said, "after you called." Adeline opened the file. The first page held a photograph from an employee identification card. It was the same face, only about 10 years younger. Beneath it was the date the card had been issued, and beside that was a red stamp bearing a different date. The second page was a summary of a disciplinary decision. Adeline read it slowly, twice, then a third time. "Gregory Whitfield left the Federal Bureau of Investigation in March of 2019, Doyle said. "He didn't retire. He was fired. The internal investigation concerned the sale of information from active case files to a third party. They couldn't prosecute him because there wasn't enough physical evidence, but his credentials were revoked that same day." Adeline didn't take her eyes from the page. 7 years, she said. 7 years before he called me. "That's right." "So there was never anything," Adeline said. "It wasn't that he had been suspended and was working in secret. It wasn't that he was operating outside procedure. None of it ever existed." Doyle said nothing. She let the silence do its own work. And within that silence, Adeline began fitting everything together, piece by piece, in the exact order she had spent the past 2 days trying not to face. She thought of the first hospital bill, the one that had arrived on an afternoon in June. She thought of the call that had come that very same afternoon. Not the next day, not the next week, but that same afternoon. She thought of the figure he had recited over the phone before she could say it, accurate to the last $100. She thought of how her mother's insurance had been denied 3 times in a row for technical reasons no one at the call center could explain, and how her mother had been transferred to a treatment center outside the insurance network because of a phone call Adeline still didn't know who had made. "Miss Doyle," she said, her voice very quiet. "Yes? If someone wanted to force a person to become a spy, and that person had nothing to lose, what would they have to do first?" Doyle looked at her. "They would have to create something she could lose," she said. Adeline nodded slowly. "That debt wasn't a disaster," she said. "It was engineered. Someone built it first, and then called me, 14 months ago." Doyle neither confirmed nor denied it. She only said, "I've seen something similar 3 times in my career." Adeline placed both hands flat on the table to stop them from trembling. "I gave him 3 folders," she said. "Over 3 months, I thought I was helping the government bring down a criminal organization. It turns out I was handing Elias Ferrante's internal files to a man who was thrown out of the bureau 7 years ago." She looked up. "I haven't known who I was working for at any point during the past 14 months. Doyle took a sip of coffee. "Miss Marsh, I'm going to tell you exactly what I'm able to tell you," she said. "You committed a crime. You took documents that didn't belong to you, and passed them to a third party in exchange for a material benefit. And even though you were deceived, that still constitutes a criminal act. But you were coerced. You acted under a threat against a family member, and you possess something I need. There is a lawful path forward for you. You make a formal statement, sign a cooperation agreement, become a witness, and receive protection. Not promises made over the phone. There will be a prosecutor's signature, a court record, and a case number you can verify yourself. That is the difference between him and me. Adeline was silent for a long time. I have a recording, she said. 31 minutes. He mentioned something that no one except 4 people in that house knows exists. Doyle set down her cup, and for the first time that morning, her posture changed. Keep it safe, she said. Don't send it by email. Don't upload it to the cloud. Then Adeline asked the question she had been carrying inside her for 2 days. Miss Doyle, if I gave you the name of a trust, could you trace it? I could, Doyle said. Depending on which state it was registered in, it might take anywhere from a few days to a few weeks. What trust? Harrogate Trust, Adeline said. Doyle pulled out a pen and wrote the name on the back of the receipt. What's unusual about it? It is paying to keep my mother alive, Adeline said, and I think it was also the last name my father mentioned before he died. No one made her go back. That was what Adeline thought about the entire way home from Hoboken. She had the business card of a real federal agent. She had a lawful way forward, and she could sign the papers and disappear from both worlds at once. Still, shortly before noon, she rang the bell at the mansion's side door. Teddy opened it. He looked at her for a long moment without saying anything, then stepped back to let her through. Elias was in his study. He looked up when she entered and didn't ask where she had been. I have 2 things, she said. She placed the phone on his desk. 31 minutes of recorded conversation with Whitfield. He knows there are 4 folders on your hard drive. I never told him that because I never opened the 4th one. Elias sat perfectly still. What is the second thing? Adeline placed the treatment center's billing records beside the phone. 14 months of my mother's medical bills, she said. 1 paying party, Harrogate Trust. Have you ever heard that name? He pulled the papers toward him, turned exactly 1 page, then stopped. Yes, he said. Adeline's head snapped up. Where? In this house, he replied. He called Teddy in. 3 sentences. No more. The family's outside expense ledgers, going back to my father's time. All of them. Bring them up here. Teddy left, then returned 15 minutes later with 2 boxes of records that required 2 trips to carry. He set them on the floor, removed his jacket, pulled out a chair, and sat beside the boxes. He didn't ask what they were looking for. Elias gave him a single name, and that was enough. Adeline sat across from him and began going through the records with him. The first 2 hours passed in almost absolute silence. Teddy didn't say a word to her. He pushed each stack of papers aside after he had finished with it, steadily, neither quickly nor slowly, and every time she reached for the next one, he pulled it toward himself first. She understood what that meant and didn't react. A little after 3 o'clock in the afternoon, his hand stopped. He said nothing. He simply placed 1 finger on a line and held it there. Elias stood and came around the desk. Adeline followed. All 3 of them looked down. The entry lay in the middle of a column of minor expenses from a year long past. Recipient, Harrogate Trust. Ledger date, April of 2011. Elias stared at that figure for a long time. Then he spoke, and there was something in his voice that Adeline had never heard during the 3 months she had worked for him. Something very slight, very brief, but real. I took control of the family in 2011, he said. September. Teddy looked up. Which means this came before, he said. 5 months before, Elias replied. This trust has been in my family's expense ledgers since my father was alive. It has passed through my hands for 15 years, and I have never seen it. Adeline stood there with both hands gripping the edge of the desk. Then it doesn't belong to Whitfield, she said. He is only the man someone hired. No, Elias said. He is the hand. The mind behind it has been inside this house since before I took the chair. He closed the ledger. No one speaks the name Harrogate outside this room, he said. Not to anyone. Don't write it in a message. Don't say it over the phone. The moment that name leaves this room, whoever built it will know where we are looking, and everything will disappear within 24 hours. Teddy nodded once. Adeline nodded as well. Elias looked at her. "There is one more thing," he said. "What did your father do?" "He was an accountant," she replied, "for the dockworkers' union. He died in 2011. They said it was an accident during the night shift." The room fell silent. Elias said nothing more, but Adeline saw him look down at the closed ledger once again, then glance at Teddy. Teddy didn't say anything either. He merely stood, walked to the small table in the corner, poured a glass of water, returned, and set it in front of Adeline. That was all he did. He didn't apologize, didn't explain, didn't say a word about how 2 nights earlier he had ordered her into the car, in the voice one used for a traitor. He simply set down the water, pulled his chair closer to the second box, and resumed turning pages. Adeline lifted the glass with both hands and drank. She didn't know why her eyes stung so badly. Over the past 3 days, one man had stepped in front of a bullet for her, a federal agent had offered her a lawful way out, and a man who had deceived her for 14 months had threatened to disconnect her mother's dialysis machine. But this was the first time anyone had looked at her and decided that she wasn't a liar. The news arrived the following morning. Not in a phone call, but in an envelope. Teddy brought it upstairs, placed it on the desk, and waited. Elias opened it, read for 10 seconds, then set the paper down. "Vincent," he said. "He has called a council meeting." Adeline was sitting at the far end of the table with the second box of records. She looked up. "Called it for what?" "To vote on whether I am still fit to sit in this chair," Elias replied. She lowered the file in her hands. "Can he do that?" "Any advisor who has served for more than 20 years has the right to request a hearing," he said. "My father wrote that provision into the charter. He believed it would protect the family from an unfit leader." Vincent Aldridge arrived after lunch. At 62, he walked in without needing anyone to show him the way, sat in the chair he had occupied for 15 years, and accepted a cup of coffee from the housekeeper with a courteous thank you. He didn't look at Adeline even once, and that refusal to look at her was more unsettling than any stare could have been. "I didn't come here to argue," he said. "I came so you would hear this from me before you heard it from someone else." Elias didn't respond. "I have sent the request to all 5 families," Vincent said. "The hearing will open in 5 days, at the usual place. I will ask for a vote on whether you remain qualified to lead the Ferrante family." "On what grounds?" Elias asked. Vincent set down his cup. "On the grounds that 3 nights ago, in a room with 40 witnesses and a team of federal agents, you gave the seal of the family to a woman your own people had just accused of being a spy, and you did it less than 2 minutes after you had been shot." He spoke the words in the voice of a man reading from an official record. There was no contempt in it, and that was precisely what made it carry so much weight. "You know I care for you," Vincent said. "I held you before you could walk. But I sat beside your father for 20 years, and I know what he would say. He would say that a leader mustn't make an irreversible decision while he is bleeding. You bound all 5 families to a woman you had known for less than 3 months. I call that a rash oath, and I have the right to ask the other 4 families whether they want to place the lives of their loved ones in the hands of a man who makes decisions that way." Adeline sat perfectly still. She recognized the worst thing in everything she had just heard. He had a point. If she had been one of the other 4, sitting in that room, while her own family waited at home, she would have nodded too. Elias allowed the silence to stretch. Then he spoke. 5 days. 5 days. Vincent confirmed. "I accept the hearing," Elias said. Vincent nodded, rose, and fastened the button of his jacket. "I hope you are right," he said. "I truly do." Then he left, and at the door, for the first time since he had arrived, he turned and looked at Adeline. "Miss Marsh," he said, his voice still mild. "I have nothing against you. I only regret that you were in that room that night." The door closed behind him. Teddy stood and followed to see him all the way to his car. Only when the 2 of them were alone did Adeline speak. "What happens if you lose?" Elias didn't answer immediately. He walked to the window and stood with his back to her. "If I lose, the council will choose someone else," he said. "Within the next 24 hours, everything bearing my name will pass into that person's name. And as for me," he continued before she could ask, speaking as though he were reading the weather, "that will be up to them." Adeline felt her throat go dry. "What about me?" she asked. He turned around. "You will still be protected," he said. She shook her head. "Don't say that just to reassure me." I am not saying it to reassure you, he replied. I am telling you the law. That ring wasn't a gift from me. It is the seal of the family. When the council bows its head, they aren't bowing to me. They are bowing to what has been spoken. The oath doesn't depend on whether I am still alive. Whoever takes my chair will inherit every obligation I have made to you. Adeline looked down at her hand. The ring was still there, still too large, still something she had to hold in place with her thumb whenever she moved too suddenly. So if you die, she said, I will still be safe. Yes, he said, but you won't be. Elias didn't answer. It was the first time he had ever failed to answer one of her direct questions. She looked down at the 2 open boxes of records on the floor. 15 years of ledgers, thousands of expense entries, and a name buried somewhere among them that connected her father to the man who had just walked out the door. 5 days, she said. Elias nodded. 5 days. Adeline didn't sleep that night. She sat on the floor of her room and tried to remember the final week of her father's life. The week her mother said he hadn't slept and had spent hours sitting at the kitchen table. She remembered very little. She had been 12 years old. But there was one thing she remembered clearly because it was the only thing her mother had never thrown away. After the funeral, a toolbox had been returned to the house from his workplace. Her mother hadn't opened it. She had taken it to a storage facility in Bayonne and paid the rent on that unit faithfully for 15 years, even during the months when she didn't have enough money to buy her medicine. The next morning, Adeline told Elias she needed to go somewhere. He didn't ask where. He only said, Teddy is going with you. Teddy drove, parked about 100 feet from the storage unit, and remained in the car when she said she wanted to go inside alone. The key to the unit had stayed in her mother's wallet all those years. The toolbox sat in the farthest corner beneath a tarp. Adeline lowered herself to the floor and opened the lid. On top were the ordinary belongings of a man who worked at the docks, and she removed them one at a time, placing each one beside her without rushing. At the very bottom, wedged between the lining and the side of the box, was a hardbound notebook whose cover had softened with age. She opened it. The first page bore a date from 2010. It was her father's handwriting, small and orderly, the handwriting of a man who had spent his life keeping records. Every line documented a shipment, the date, the vessel number, the declared weight, the actual weight received, the name of the person who had signed for it. She turned the pages. As the entries went on, more and more lines bore a tiny dot in the left margin. She counted more than 40 of them. She didn't understand what they meant, but she understood one thing. For more than a year, her father had been recording things he wasn't supposed to record, and he had hidden this notebook inside his toolbox. Near the middle of the notebook, tucked between 2 pages, was a small, flat brass key with a number stamped into it. She had seen that kind of key only once in her life, when she had gone to the bank with her mother. A safe deposit box key. Adeline turned to the final page containing any writing. There were only 3 lines. The first was a long string of numbers. The second was 2 words. Harrogate Trust. The third was in her father's handwriting, written more quickly than the 2 lines above it, slanting slightly as though he had written it while standing. Don't sign. Tell Nora if I don't come home next week. Adeline read those 3 lines. Then she read them again, more slowly, 1 word at a time, as though she had read them wrong the first time. Don't sign. Tell Nora if I don't come home next week. The notebook slipped from her hand and fell to the floor of the storage unit. She didn't pick it up. She sat there with both hands braced against the concrete, and for a length of time she would never afterward be able to measure. She couldn't think at all. Then everything began coming back to her, one thing at a time, in no particular order. He had known. He had sat at the kitchen table all week because he had known. He hadn't told her mother because he hadn't wanted her to carry that knowledge inside her. He had left behind a single line, just in case, and hidden it in the one place he knew would be returned to his family. Then he had still gone to work that night. They had told a 12-year-old child that her father had fallen. They had told her mother there were no witnesses. No one had investigated any further, because what was there to investigate when an accountant fell at the docks at 2 o'clock in the morning? Adeline heard a sound come from her own throat, a sound she didn't recognize as hers. She folded forward until her forehead touched the cold concrete floor, and she wept aloud, the kind of weeping she hadn't allowed herself at 12 because her mother had been crying then, and there had only been room in that house for one person to cry. She wept for a long time. When she finally raised her head, her eyes were swollen, and everything in her mind had rearranged itself into a new order, an order so cruel that she had to speak it aloud before she could believe it. "The same name," she said to the empty storage unit. "The name that killed my father in 2011. And the name that is paying to keep my mother alive." She picked up the notebook. She wiped it with her sleeve. She removed the brass key from between the pages and clenched it so tightly in her palm that it left an imprint in her skin. She remained seated for a few more minutes until her breathing steadied, then rose, closed the toolbox, pulled the tarp back over it exactly as it had been, and walked outside. The light beyond the door made her narrow her eyes. Teddy had gotten out of the car and was leaning against the door. When he saw her face, he took 2 steps toward her, then stopped, without asking a question. She held out the notebook. "I need to go back and see him right now," she said. Teddy accepted the notebook with both hands, holding it the way a person holds something that belonged to the dead. He opened the car door for her. Adeline walked around the rear of the car, and as she did, she glanced across the street. A dark-colored car was parked there about 160 feet away. Its front end pointed toward the storage unit, and someone was sitting inside. Elias read the final page twice, exactly as she had in the storage unit. Then he set the notebook down, placed the brass key on top of it, and sat in silence for a long time. "Your father knew in advance," he said. "He knew for an entire week." Adeline nodded. "He still went to work that night, because if he hadn't gone, they would have come to the house," Elias said. Adeline hadn't thought of that, and when she understood it, she had to sit down. "He chose to go out to them," Elias continued. "It was the only choice he had left to make." He rose, walked to the window, and stood there with his back to her. Then he said something that seemed to have nothing to do with the notebook. "My wife's name was Miriam." Adeline looked up. She had never heard anyone in that house speak that name. "She died in 2020, he said. "She was 7 months pregnant." He didn't tell her what had happened. He only gave her the year and the number 7, then left them untouched. "We knew it was a boy," he said. "We had chosen a name." Adeline sat perfectly still. "For the past 6 years, I haven't made promises to anyone," Elias said. "Not because I didn't want to, because someone inside my house betrayed me, and I don't know who it was, and anyone who stands beside me will be standing in the exact place Miriam stood." He turned around. "I am going to tell you something now," he said, "and I want you to hear all of it before you react." Adeline waited. 3 months ago, when you started working here, I knew from the beginning. I didn't stop you. I let you continue, week after week, because I needed to know where those documents were going and who was receiving them at the other end. That was the only reason. You weren't the person I was protecting during those 3 months. You were the thing I was watching." Adeline said nothing. "In the 4th week, I had someone investigate your records," he said. "I knew your mother underwent dialysis 3 times a week. I knew she was on the transplant waiting list. I knew the amount of the debt before I read it aloud to you in the car." He paused. "I knew from the 4th week, and I did nothing." Adeline could hear the blood rushing in her ears. "You knew my mother was waiting for a transplant," she said. "Yes. You knew someone was using her to force me to do this." "I suspected it," he said. "I didn't know who." "You could have paid those bills at any time during the past 3 months, she said. "For you, it would have taken 1 phone call." "Yes," he said. He added nothing to soften the word. He didn't say that he had considered it. He didn't say that the choice had tormented him. He merely stood there and left the truth between them like an object with weight. "Why didn't you do it?" she asked. "Because if I paid those bills, the person on the other end would know I had seen you," Elias said. "The line would have gone dead, and I would have lost the only chance I have had in 6 years to find the person who killed my wife." He looked directly at her. "That is what I chose," he said. "I chose to leave your mother in his hands for another 3 months, because I needed the line to remain alive." The room was silent for a long time. Adeline stood. She walked to the desk, picked up her father's notebook, and held it against her chest with both hands. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't speak a single harsh word. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet and level, and that made it harder to endure than any shout could have been. "That night at the hotel," she said, "you stepped in front of me. I have thought about that for the past 4 days. I kept thinking that a man had been willing to take a bullet for me even though he knew I was betraying him. I thought it was the kindest thing anyone had ever done for me." Elias didn't respond. "Now I am sitting here, And I no longer know what it was, she said. Were you shielding me? Or were you shielding your line? He could have lied. He could have spoken one sentence, and she would have believed him because she wanted to believe. Both, he said. Adeline nodded slowly. Thank you for telling me the truth, she said. She walked toward the door. At the doorway, she stopped without turning around. My father refused to sign a piece of paper, and it cost him his life, she said. You spent 3 months calculating how to keep a line alive. I am not saying you were wrong. I am only thinking that if my father had known how to calculate the way you do, perhaps he would still be alive. Then she said one last thing. I am not leaving because I am angry with you. I am leaving because I need one night in a place where I am not part of anyone's plan. Elias didn't try to stop her. He didn't call Teddy. He remained motionless in the room and listened to the front door close downstairs, followed by silence. Adeline walked to the end of the street before calling a car. The brass key was in her coat pocket. Her father's notebook was in her hands, and in her mind, though she didn't want it to, the counting continued. 3 days left. Adeline rented a room in Union City and managed to sleep for 4 hours. At 7:10 in the morning, her phone vibrated. It was the treatment center's number. Is this Miss Marsh? Yes. We are calling to inform you that Mrs. Nora Marsh's treatment this morning has been canceled. Adeline bolted upright. What do you mean canceled? Her paying party terminated its guarantee at midnight, the woman said, sounding as though she herself was uncomfortable with what she had to say. Our system shows that the cancellation order came through at 12:40. Her entire funding file has been closed. She was transferred out of the center this morning. Transferred where? Adeline asked. She was taken to the emergency department at the county hospital. We no longer have legal authorization to continue her treatment. I am very sorry. Adeline couldn't remember how she got dressed. She took a car to the county hospital and spent 40 minutes at the admissions desk before anyone told her where her mother was. Nora Marsh lay on a gurney in a waiting corridor with 6 other patients. From down the hall, Adeline saw a figure under a thin blanket, her head turned away, looking as frail and motionless as Nora had been the day before. Adeline rushed forward and reached out to grab the woman's hand, but a nurse quickly stopped her, informing her that the patient resting there was under sedation. Overwhelmed with panic and despair, Adeline turned away to find the doctor on duty. She was told that the hospital would treat Nora as an emergency once her condition became serious enough, that there was a process for patients who no longer had a source of payment, that she could apply for assistance, and that approval usually took several weeks. Several weeks, Adeline said. She needs dialysis 3 times a week. The doctor looked at her with the eyes of someone who had been forced to say this too many times in her life, and no longer knew how to make it sound less cruel. I know, she said. Adeline stepped back into the hallway and leaned against the wall. She had thought she would cry. She didn't. Something else was happening inside her, something cold and clear, and it told her that this wasn't an administrative mistake. It had happened at 12:40 in the night, less than 6 hours after she had left the mansion, with her father's notebook in her hands, and a dark car parked across the street, watching her emerge from the storage facility. The old phone in her pocket vibrated. She knew who it was before she looked at the screen. She answered without speaking. Have you reached the hospital? He asked. Adeline remained silent. I asked you a question, he said, his voice as flat as it had been the last time. Did you take anything out of that storage unit in Bayonne yesterday? She looked down at her bag, where the hardbound notebook rested. Yes, she said. Good, he replied. Then this is simple. Your father's notebook. By noon today, or she comes off the machine. She heard him breathing through the phone and realized he was walking somewhere outdoors. I will send you the address, he said. You come alone. You bring the entire notebook, with no pages torn out, and I will know if you remove one. The line went dead. Adeline stood there for a long time. Then she did something she would later be unable to explain, as either reason or instinct. She took out her real phone, opened the camera, and photographed the entire notebook, 1 page at a time. 84 pictures taken right there in the hospital corridor, her hands trembling as people passed around her. When she had finished, she photographed the final page 3 more times to be certain. Then she put away the phone, returned the notebook to her bag, and went back to look at her mother once more. Nora was asleep. Adeline adjusted the blanket around her, sat in the chair beside the gurney, and in her mind, everything was placed on the scales very quickly. If she handed over the notebook, She would lose the only evidence proving that her father had been murdered, and she would also lose the only thing Elias could bring before the council 3 days from now. If she didn't hand it over, her mother would remain in this corridor. She sat there for 40 minutes. She thought of the final page in the notebook and the first 3 words on its last line, "Do not sign." Her father had stood in this exact place 15 years earlier, and he had chosen not to sign. And he had died for that choice. And he had died so those people wouldn't come to their home. Adeline raised her eyes to her mother. "I am sorry, Dad," she whispered. "I can't do what you did." She stood. She had made her decision. She would take them the notebook. The message with the address arrived at 11:10, an empty lot behind an abandoned industrial district in Kearney. Adeline called a car, held the bag against her throughout the drive, and got out at the hospital entrance to collect one more document before leaving. She passed through the revolving doors, stepped onto the front steps, and stopped. At the foot of the stairs, directly in the stream of people leaving the hospital, stood a large man with his arms at his sides and his face turned squarely toward the entrance. Teddy Ricci didn't approach her. He didn't call her name. He merely stood there, and there was no telling how long he had been waiting. Adeline stood on the steps and didn't come down. "You were following me," she said. "No," Teddy replied. "I was waiting for you." She tightened her grip on the strap of her bag. "I have to go." "She isn't here," he said. Adeline didn't understand. "She left here at 4 o'clock this morning," Teddy said. "One of our cars took her. She is at the center on 23rd Street, in a private room, and they began her replacement treatment at 8. Adeline heard every word but couldn't fit them together. "I just went in to see her," she said. "She was lying in the hallway." "What time did you go in?" She opened her mouth, then stopped. 7:40. Teddy nodded. The woman under the blue blanket in the corridor. Adeline stood frozen. "Her name is Reyes," Teddy said. "You walked into a crowded hallway, saw a frail woman from behind, and let fear tell you it was your mother. That is normal." Adeline pulled out her phone with a trembling hand, called the center on 23rd Street, gave her name, and waited. 30 seconds later, her mother's voice came through the line, tired but clear, asking whether she had eaten breakfast. Adeline had to turn her face toward the wall. When she ended the call, she stood there for a long time before turning back. "Who gave the order?" she asked. Teddy didn't answer. He merely opened the car door. Elias was in his study, exactly where she had left him the night before. There was nothing on the desk except the 2 open boxes of records. "You paid for my mother," Adeline said. He nodded. "All of it?" "Yes." "The old debt too?" "Yes." "What time?" "I made the call at 12:55, he said, "after I learned that the other side had terminated the guarantee." Adeline stood motionless in the middle of the room. 12:55 at night, she said. "I had already left." "Yes." "You didn't know whether I would come back?" "No." "You didn't know whether I would take the notebook and trade it for my mother?" "No," he said. "Then what conditions did you set?" she asked. Elias looked at her. "None." Adeline shook her head. "No one does that. No one pays that kind of money for someone who walked out of his house in the middle of the night after saying the things I said." He didn't answer immediately. He rose, walked around the desk, and stopped several steps away from her. "I am not buying you," he said. Adeline said nothing. "I am repaying a debt to a man I never met," he said. He refused to sign a piece of paper, and he paid for that refusal with his life. "In my world, there aren't many men capable of doing such a thing." He paused. "I have spent 40 years among men who will sign anything placed in front of them." Then I read one hurried line in a notebook, hidden at the bottom of a toolbox. "Don't sign." Adeline felt her throat tighten. "This has nothing to do with you," Elias said. "It has to do with the fact that for 15 years, no one repaid him for anything. No one investigated. No one asked questions. No one told his wife a single word of the truth. He did what was right, and they erased him." He looked directly at her. "Last night, you said that if your father had known how to calculate the way I do, perhaps he would still be alive. You were right. I thought about that sentence all night." Adeline wanted to say something, but she couldn't. "The debt has been paid in full," he said. "It doesn't depend on whether you stay. If you walk out that door now, your mother will remain at that center until the day a kidney becomes available for her. If you sign an agreement to cooperate with Agent Doyle and testify against me, your mother will still remain there. If I lose my chair 3 days from now, I have made arrangements for her treatment to continue being paid." The room remained silent for a long time. Adeline opened her bag, took out her father's notebook, and placed it on the desk between them. She didn't hand it to him. She merely set it down. "At 11:10, he sent me an address in Kearney," she said. "Noon today. The notebook in exchange for my mother's treatment." Elias looked at the notebook. "You were going to go." "I was already in the car," she said. He nodded slowly and didn't ask another question. That was what nearly broke her. "Aren't you going to ask me why?" she said. "No," he replied. "Anyone would have gone." Adeline looked down at her hands. In the past 4 days, 3 men had spoken to her about her mother. One had used her as a rope to bind Adeline. One had known and done nothing for 3 months, then told her so to her face without asking to be forgiven. The third had paid every penny in the middle of the night, when no one was watching, and had asked for nothing in return. Those 3 men were only 2. She raised her eyes. "I am staying," she said. Elias's expression didn't change. "You don't have to stay." "I know," she said. "That is why I am staying." Adeline didn't go to Kearney. She called Doyle at 11:40 and read her the number stamped into the brass key. It took Doyle a day and a half. The safe deposit box was registered in Daniel Marsh's name and had been opened in 2010. And because its owner was dead, they needed a death certificate, proof that Adeline was his legal heir, and a court order. Doyle obtained all 3. She didn't break the lock. She didn't ask anyone for a favor. She filed the petition that afternoon, secured a judge's signature the following morning, and arrived at the bank with Adeline at 10 o'clock, with a bank employee present as a witness and a formal record drawn up on the spot. Inside the box was a thick stack of papers. Doyle glanced through the first 3 pages, then folded them closed. "Miss Marsh," she said, "these aren't the notes of a curious accountant. This is a disbursement ledger. Someone gave your father the complete disbursement records for the Harrogate Fund and told him to sign off on them. He kept a copy and refused to sign." She held out her hand, and Adeline shook it. "I am entering this into the case file," Doyle said. "It will have a case number, a formal record, a date, and a time. From this moment forward, it is no longer something anyone can make disappear with a phone call." Then she took a sealed envelope from her briefcase and placed it in Adeline's hand. "This is a legally certified extract from a declassified file," she said. "It bears an official seal, the date of issue, and my name at the bottom. You have the right to keep it." Adeline looked at the envelope. "Aren't you going to tell me what is inside?" "Read it, and you will understand why I am not reading it aloud in the middle of a bank," Doyle said. "Miss Marsh, I am giving this to you because you have the right to possess it, not because I want you to carry it anywhere. I am not asking what you intend to do with it." By the time Adeline returned to the mansion, Teddy had been sitting at the table since morning with a copy of the disbursement ledger and the 2 boxes of old records. He worked like a man who had spent 30 years reconciling dockside accounts, slowly and without missing a thing. Late that afternoon, he finally looked up. "It travels in a circle," he said. "The money leaves the port's revenue as equipment repair fees, passes through 3 companies, then goes into Harrogate. All 3 companies are registered in Delaware, and the same law firm serves as registered agent for every one of them." He tapped one finger against a line. "And that law firm has appeared in this house's disbursement record since your father's time." Elias rose. "How much?" he asked. "I need 1 more day to confirm the final figure," Teddy said. "But it isn't small." That evening, after Teddy had gone home, Elias called Adeline into the study. "The meeting is the day after tomorrow," he said. "You aren't coming." Adeline placed Doyle's envelope on the desk. "I am." "You don't understand what kind of place that is," he said. "There are no police officers in that room, no lawyers, and no one keeping a record. There are 5 men, and one of them will be declared a traitor. Once you walk into that room, you are no longer anyone's witness. You are simply someone sitting in the room." "I know," she said. "I will present the evidence," Elias said. "I have the disbursement ledger. I have the money trail. I have your father's notebook. I don't need you standing there to prove anything." "That is exactly the problem," Adeline said. He fell silent. She walked to the desk, rested her hand on her father's hardbound notebook, and continued without raising her voice. "For 15 years, not one person has spoken the truth about my father. The police didn't. The union didn't. They handed my mother a piece of paper with the word accident written on it. And that was the end of a man's life. My mother worked 2 shifts a day for the next 6 years and never knew why her husband had died. Elias didn't interrupt her. He killed my father through that account, Adeline said, then used the same account to keep my mother alive for 14 months so he could force me to work for him. The same name, the same stream of money. She raised her eyes to Elias. No one gets to tell this story for me. Elias looked at her for a long time. If you walk into that room, he said, and they vote against me, you will be standing in the middle of it alone. Then I will stand alone, she said. He had nothing more to say. He knew that voice, because it was the voice he himself used once his decision had been made. He nodded once. Then he said, I won't apologize for trying to stop you. And I won't apologize for refusing to listen, she replied. That night, Adeline sat on the floor of her room for a long time, with 3 things arranged before her. Her father's notebook, the copy of the fund's disbursement ledger, and Doyle's sealed envelope, which she still hadn't opened. She opened it shortly before 2 o'clock in the morning. She read the first page. Then she set the paper down, covered her face with both hands, and remained that way for a very long time. When she finally lowered her hands, she placed everything inside her briefcase, fastened the lock, and set the case beside the door. 1 day left. They arrived 15 minutes early. Elias went in first with 2 of his men. Adeline stopped in the outer hallway with the briefcase in her hand, and Teddy stood between her and the door. Give me your hand, he said. Adeline held it out. He placed a small metal object in her palm, old and tarnished, shaped like an anchor. It belonged to his father, Teddy said. The old man pinned it on every time he entered this room. I have kept it for 15 years. Adeline looked down at it. Why are you giving it to me? Because no one in there listens to an outsider, he said. If you wear it on your coat, at least they will have to hear your first sentence to the end. He opened the door. 5 men were already seated. Salvatore Grasso sat in the middle. Elias sat to his left. Vincent Aldridge remained standing, and he began the moment the door closed. He spoke for 11 minutes, and didn't say a single thing that was untrue. He recounted every detail of the night at the hotel, in its proper order. He spoke of a head of house who had been shot, was losing blood, and in less than 2 minutes had bound all 5 families to a woman whom his own people had just accused of being a spy. He didn't use a single harsh word. From beginning to end, he referred to Adeline as Miss Marsh. I am not saying she is guilty, Vincent concluded. I am saying we don't know. And the head of the Ferrante family made a decision for all 5 houses, while he wasn't clear-headed enough to make one. I request a vote. Grasso turned to Elias. What do you have to say? Elias didn't rise. Miss Marsh will speak, he replied. A faint stir moved around the table. One of the men from the other 4 houses asked when an outsider had been permitted to speak in that room. Grasso raised one hand about 2 inches. The room fell silent. She is wearing the seal of the Ferrante house, he said. She is not an outsider. Go ahead. Adeline stood. She opened the briefcase, and the first thing she placed on the table wasn't evidence at all. It was a hardbound notebook whose cover had softened with age. My father's name was Daniel Marsh, she said. He was an accountant for the Dock Workers Union. He died in May of 2011, during the night shift, with no witnesses. It was recorded as an accident. She opened the notebook to its final page and turned it toward Grasso. This is his handwriting. This is the account number, and this is the last line he ever wrote. Grasso pulled the notebook closer, read it, and said nothing. He passed it to the man beside him. The notebook made its way around the table. Adeline laid the disbursement ledger down next. My father kept a copy of the disbursement records for a fund called the Harrogate Trust, and refused to sign off on them. These papers had been kept in a safe deposit box under his name since 2010. The box was opened this week under a court order, with an official record and a bank employee present as a witness. Then she placed Teddy's reconciliation report on the table. And here are 15 years of the Ferrante family's financial records set beside 15 years of disbursements from that fund. The money left the dock's revenue disguised as equipment repair fees, passed through 3 companies registered in Delaware, and then entered Harrogate. The same law firm was listed as the representative for all 3 companies. She raised her eyes. Over 15 years, the total was $60 million. No one spoke. She continued, and her voice didn't tremble. That fund has appeared in this house's disbursement records since April of 2011. Mr. Ferrante took power in September of that same year. It existed 5 months before he did. The man who created it isn't the youngest man sitting here. It is the man who has sat at this table the longest. Vincent didn't react. Grasso remained still for a long time. Then he took out his phone, read the account number from the final page of the notebook aloud to the person on the other end, and spoke several brief sentences in Italian. The entire room waited. 7 minutes passed. Grasso lowered the phone. "The account is real," he said. "It is still active. The registered representative is the law firm she just named." He turned to Vincent. "Explain yourself." And that was when everything became difficult to understand. Vincent Aldridge didn't argue. He didn't grow angry, deny anything, or call anyone a liar. He sat down in his chair, adjusted his cuffs, and spoke in the same mild voice he had used throughout those first 11 minutes. "I don't dispute that figure." A murmur moved through the room. "I have taken money from this family for 15 years, he said. 60 million. Perhaps more. I haven't counted it as precisely as Miss Marsh has." He looked up at Grasso. "I am prepared to repay all of it, with interest, within 90 days. I have sufficient assets." He said it so calmly that Adeline felt gooseflesh rise across her skin, because she understood, at the same instant as everyone else in the room, that he had prepared this answer long ago. Theft was a matter of money, and money could be repaid. In the world of these men, no one was condemned for a debt that could be made whole. Vincent Aldridge had just confessed, and now he sat there with both hands resting quietly on the table, perfectly calm. Adeline looked at Elias. For the first time in 6 days, she saw something close to bewilderment on his face. Grasso tapped one finger against the tabletop twice. 90 days, he said. "Does anyone object?" No one did. Adeline remained standing. "I have one more thing," she said. Grasso looked up. She opened the briefcase one last time and took out Doyle's envelope. She removed the papers inside, placed them on the table, and turned them toward Grasso. "This is a legally certified extract from a declassified file," she said. "It bears an official seal, the date of issue, and the name of the agent who released it. You can verify it the same way you just verified that account." No one touched the papers. On November 17th, 2020, Adeline said, "Mrs. Miriam Ferrante died. She was 7 months pregnant." The room fell silent in an entirely different way. "That case was investigated for 4 years, she said. "They found the man who built the device. He died in prison last year, which is why the file was declassified. The file contains records of payments made to him. 3 transfers, in September, October, and November of 2020. She placed one finger on the second page and pushed the papers a little farther across the table. "The account number that sent the money is here," she said. "It is the same account number written on the final line of my father's notebook." Grasso drew the papers toward him. He read them very slowly. Then he passed them to the man beside him, and they made their way around the table once more. But this time, no one passed them along quickly. Each man read, looked toward Vincent, then set them down. Elias didn't take the papers. He sat motionless with both hands resting on the table, and he didn't look at anyone. "Wait," Vincent Aldridge said. It was the first time all morning that his voice had changed. "Wait," he repeated. "Where did she get this? She is the one who carried documents out of this house for 3 straight months. I am the one who reported it. Now she produces a federal document. And you believe her?" No one answered him. That was what made it frightening. The man seated farthest away rose first, said nothing, and went to stand in the corner of the room. Then the second man stood. Then the third. Salvatore Grasso didn't rise. He merely turned his chair at an angle, presenting his back to Vincent, and remained that way. After 40 years in this life, that was how he passed sentence. Vincent looked around the table and understood that there wasn't a single man left on his side. He stood too quickly. A chair toppled over. Someone heard a woman draw a sharp breath, and only later did Adeline realize that the sound had come from her. She saw Teddy move past her, remarkably fast for a man of his size, and she heard 2 sounds, one a dull impact, and the other the clatter of metal striking the floor. Then everything stopped. Teddy stood behind Vincent, one hand pinning both of his wrists behind his back. Vincent breathed heavily. He didn't cry out. He didn't beg. He merely looked at Elias, And there was something in that gaze Adeline wouldn't understand until many years later, when she realized it was expectation. The entire room waited. The 4 men standing in the corner waited. Grasso turned his chair back around and waited. Teddy waited, his grip unchanged. No one needed to say what they were waiting for, because there was only one man in that room with the right to decide, and no one could challenge that right. Elias Ferrante rose. He walked around the table. He stopped before the man who had carried him in his arms before he could walk. He looked at him for a very long time. Then Elias raised one hand, and Adeline saw Teddy tighten his hold, preparing himself. Elias lowered his hand. "He was there," he said, his voice no louder than it had ever been. "At the funeral. He stood beside me the entire time. He was the one who helped me out of the church." Vincent said nothing. "If I kill you today," Elias said, "I become the very thing that took them from me." He turned his back. He walked to the door. He didn't order Teddy to release Vincent, nor did he give any other command. He simply opened the door. Catherine Doyle was standing in the hallway with 4 of her agents, and there was no telling how long she had been there. She stepped inside, read Vincent Aldridge's name, recited the case number, and read him his rights, in the even voice of someone who had spoken those words hundreds of times before. Not one man from the 4 families moved. As they led Vincent through the doorway, he stopped for exactly 1 second beside Elias. "You are letting me live," he said. "You know what they will ask me in prison, don't you?" "I know," Elias replied. Then the door closed. 6 people remained in the room, along with a stack of papers resting in the middle of the table. Salvatore Grasso rose slowly, 1 joint at a time, just as he had that night at the hotel. He looked at Elias for a long time. "I have lived in this world for 74 years, he said, "and I have never seen anyone do what you just did." He picked up his hat. "I don't know whether it means you are stronger or weaker than your father," he said, "but I know one thing for certain. You aren't like him." Then he walked out. The other 4 men followed. No one voted. No one needed to vote anymore. Gregory Whitfield was arrested 6 days later at the departure gate of Newark International Airport with a ticket to Lisbon and 2 passports bearing 2 different names. People said he didn't resist. They also said he began talking before his lawyer even arrived. Adeline wasn't there. She learned the news through a brief phone call from Catherine Doyle, and the only thing she asked was whether he had said anything about her father. Doyle said he had. "He wasn't the one who carried it out," she said. "He was only the man hired to do what came later with you. But he knew what happened in 2011, and he is telling us everything." Adeline remained seated for a long time after ending the call. She had imagined that moment through many sleepless nights, and she had thought she would feel relief. She didn't. She felt only emptiness, and within that emptiness was something else, slower and warmer, the feeling of someone who had finally set down a burden she had carried on her shoulders for 15 years, without ever realizing it was there. Her part ended in a room with a prosecutor, a lawyer, and a stack of papers. She told them everything, told it accurately, and told even the parts that shamed her. She received immunity from prosecution as a cooperating witness, with a formal record, a case number, and signatures. It wasn't a promise made over the phone. For Elias, it happened in another room. He summoned the council for the 2nd time in a single month, something no one had ever done before, and spoke for 7 minutes. He said that over the next 2 years, every Ferrante family operation in Newark and Bayonne would be transferred into legitimate legal entities, with audits, taxes, and names entered into the state registry. He stated plainly who would lose how much, and he didn't pretend no one would lose anything. Someone asked why. He answered with a single sentence: "Because I don't want my child growing up in a house where every door needs 3 locks." Salvatore Grasso cast the first vote. He said nothing else for the rest of that day. 8 months later, on an April morning, Nora Marsh's name was called. There was a kidney. The transplant took 5 hours. Adeline sat in the hallway through every one of them, and Elias sat beside her without speaking or looking at his phone, just as he had on the night he sat outside the hallway in his own home. When the doctor came out and nodded, Adeline couldn't rise from her chair for nearly 30 seconds. That afternoon, after her mother had fallen asleep and the hallway had emptied, Adeline told him there was something she wanted to do. She wanted to establish a scholarship fund for the children of dock workers, children whose parents worked the night shift, children who might one day be handed a piece of paper with the word accident written on it. She wanted it to bear her father's name, Elias listened to everything, then asked how much she needed. "Not your money," she said. "I know," he replied. "I am asking how much you need." The Daniel Marsh Fund was registered the following month, with public records, an independent board of directors, and financial reports released every year. The name Harrogate was erased from every remaining ledger. That afternoon, in the hospital hallway, when only the two of them remained on the bench outside the recovery room, Elias took a small box from his coat pocket. It wasn't the family ring. That ring still existed, still too large, still resting in her drawer, because she was afraid of losing it. This was another ring, simple, and made to fit her hand. He didn't kneel. He didn't raise his voice. He simply opened the box and held it in his palm. "Last time, I spoke in front of 100 people without asking you a single question," he said. Adeline looked down at the ring. "Now there are only the two of us," he said. "Do you want this?" She made him wait. She hadn't intended to, but she needed those few seconds because, in those seconds, she realized that this was the first time in this entire story that anyone had asked what she wanted before making the decision for her. She said yes. This story leaves behind one very simple truth. People often measure a person's worth by what they are capable of doing, but what truly defines someone is what they refuse to do when no one has the power to stop them. A father refused to sign his name to something wrong, and paid for that refusal with his life. A man held the power to decide whether the person who had destroyed his life would live or die, and chose not to use it. Beside that truth is another lesson. Respecting someone doesn't mean protecting them by taking their place. It means allowing them to choose for themselves, even when you possess enough power to choose for them. A promise has value only when the person hearing it has the right to say no. And in our darkest moments, what saves us is often neither power nor money, but someone who looks at us and believes there is still goodness left inside us. If this story touched you, please subscribe to our channel to hear more compelling stories every day. Don't forget to like this video and share it with the people you love. And please leave us a comment telling us how this story made you feel. Have you ever met someone who respected your choice at the very moment you needed it most? We truly want to hear the words that come from deep within your hearts. We wish everyone watching this video good health, a joyful life, and peace in every day ahead. Goodbye for now, and we will see you again in the next video.